Okay, so like I said, what I really want to do today was really, at a minimum, finish the table UV wrapping, right? We might be able to start up the chair a little bit. It'll see how far we go. We might just do the chair tomorrow. But it's going to be a lot of the same stuff, right? So remember, when we're UV editing, right, one of the biggest things is we go to the UV editing workspace, right? It gives us our 3D viewport, of course, but it does give us a two-dimensional view and our UV tools, right? That's the cool thing about these workspaces, right? And these little tabs up here is they kind of give you focused interfaces on what you're doing. And remember, UV unwrapping is that process, particularly if I go to 3 for face mode, Control A for select all, and generally you want to do that in the 3D view, right? This is context sensitive to the view you're in, right? So I can deselect here, and if I do Control A there, it does nothing, but Control A for select all selects here. So keep in mind that Blender's actually pretty sensitive context-wise to whatever viewport your cursor's over. And those are the things that once you get used to in Blender are actually kind of cool. And we can see the UVs, and they're basically a two-dimensional version of the model, right? We can kind of see that that's the tabletop, that's the table bottom. Those are kind of like the little side strips here. And we had to put those seams in, right? Now at this point, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to 4 for object mode, right? We want to go back up to the object level. And I'm going to turn the visibility on for the table legs, right? Remember, you can do this in the outliner, right? Remember, the outliner is right up here. You got these little eyeballs, which are kind of your visibility options, right? You can kind of check on that. Now, in this case, if I want to turn the tabletop off, right, I can just click on the eyeball for that. Now, you will notice we're not seeing this checkerboard material on the legs. Remember, go down to here to kind of the blue material level, or not the blue, the red, right? It's kind of salmon color red. Remember, there is the properties menu here, and you will see down here there is kind of these, at the very bottom of these little kind of icons on the side, there's kind of these reddish salmon colored, it's more red than salmon, but it's a little salmon, right? But salmon's kind of a reddish pink. So you'll see kind of a checkerboard one and a ball that looks like it's a little bit of a checkerboard. That one's textures, and that one, of course, is materials. Now, in this case, you'll notice I could create a new material. I could add materials here, but you'll also see there's a little ball pulled down right here, right? You see how there's this kind of little ball right there. And I can just make sure that the active material is that same one we had on the other ones. So sometimes the material wasn't added to the other objects. So you might need to click on this little ball here, make sure to pick that material, and then that material that already existed, that we already created for the tabletop, that already had the UV grid plugged in, is on those, right? So you don't have to create a new material. You don't have to plug in that UV grid again, right? It's already part of that default material called material, right? And so we just need to make sure that that material is also assigned to this object. So you can assign the same material to multiple objects. You will notice, though, that the UVs are a bit distorted and stretched here on this, right? They're not horrible because we did start this as a box, and we did some shaping to it and added some loop cuts, but we didn't do extrusions on it, right? So the UVs are not end of the world quality, but they're not really great either, right? So remember, what we need to do, I'll go back to blue wrench here, and we can do this all at one time so we could have unique texture on each of them, right? So I can go to 2 for edges, and keep in mind that sometimes it's easier to see the edges and what you're selecting and marking as seams without the texture on, right? So remember, if I kind of grab remember, you put your cursor right over this little bar right here, right? It's kind of the divider between the 3D view and the UV view. And mind you, the navigation for the UV view is the same, right? Alt left mouse button won't rotate your camera, it'll move your camera. But Alt middle mouse button, our quiz today, will move the camera. And Alt right mouse button will zoom the camera, right? So your navigation is actually universal. It pretty much works the same on all the windows, right? It's just that if it's a 2D window, a 2D view, you can't rotate it, right? You can only move and scale. So you might find your Alt left mouse button also doing move in those views. But basically your navigation is the same. It's Alt and your mouse buttons no matter what view you're in. But in this case, I can left-click drag on the divider here. You'll see kind of these 2 arrows pointing to the left and right. And you can always make one view smaller or bigger if you want to focus a little more on it. And by making it bigger, this view bigger here, we could see more of these options up here. And now is one of the times we start to talk about this a little more, right? So this is a bit newer, right? A lot of you aren't even on the UV unwrapping yet, so this is more just to get you started on it, right? We'll do plenty of review lecture on it. But remember, there are these little balls up here. One is wireframe, that just shows you the edges of your mesh, although it does kind of have a slight bit of X-ray shade on it. There is the solid white ball, which is just regular flat material. The third one, which looks a lot like the material ball, it's kind of like a ball with a little bit of a broken up by like looks like a small portion of the checkerboard. That is showing your textures. That's actually Eevee, which is your nice real-time renderer. We'll talk about that more as we go on. But oftentimes when I'm UV unwrapping, I like to just kind of have, at least when I'm setting the seams up, I like to just click on the solid white ball because that just gives us normal shaded without material preview, right? It won't show the textures. But if we go to 2 for edge mode, right? 2 for edge mode. Remember, this is one of our edit modes, right here, edge. All you have to do is start to go in here and select edge loops. Now, I'm going to do seams kind of on every corner. You don't necessarily have to, but it will kind of allow the UV unwrapping to go a little easier and give us a bit better of a result. And it's more practice with marking seams, right? So 2 for edge mode, double left click, right? Shift adds to selections, right? Shift double left click. I can select these other edge loops. Shift double left click. Shift double left click. Now I do want to take advantage of the bottom having its own seam as well. So I'll do another shift. Remember, shift adds. Often it actually subtracts as well in Blender, although sometimes it's control, like on circle select. Shift double left click, right? Double click with your left mouse button. We'll select that edge loop on the bottom. Sometimes it looks like a face selection, though. It's okay, it's not. And of course, if I right click, remember left click is, when you're using industry compatible, is your primary interaction method, right? Selects, it lets you grab on your move, rotate, scale handles. Left click allows you to grab on any handle for a tool, even if it's a move, rotate, scale, or bevel. Right click brings up your context menu. In this case, it's edge context. And we see towards the bottom is mark seam, right? Mark seam. And now those seams have been marked. And I'm just going to go around and do the same thing for this whole thing, right? Left click, double left click, shift double left click, shift double left click, shift double left click, shift double left click, right? Remember, double left click selects edge loops, right? Shift allows you to add, so you can keep adding edge loops. You can keep adding more to your selection, right? That's what shift does. I can right click, mark seam. And you see how this is all the same stuff we were doing in the first video for UV unwrapping? Double left click, shift double left click, shift double left click. If you do need to deselect an edge loop you accidentally selected, control double left click, right? So in this case, control, right? Often it's shift that adds and subtracts selections. Sometimes though, for like edge loops and circle select, it is control, right? So just keep in your mind, shift as your default, but control is an alternative, right? If you're finding shift won't deselect, try control. And it's pretty much going to be one or the other usually, right? So to get the right one, shift double left click. Although it really probably wouldn't matter that much. Shift double left click, shift double left click, shift double left click. And then of course right click, mark seam, right? When you right click, it brings that edge context menu up. And part of that is the mark seam. If you accidentally made a seam or somewhere that you don't want it, right below mark seam is clear seam. So it's pretty easy to just select that seam and clear it, right? So you have clear seam right below mark seam. And you see how I can do this as I go? I don't have to have it all selected, mark it all at the same time. I can mark as I go. So double left click, shift, control double left, shift double left click, shift double left click, shift double left click, shift double left click. You actually notice I don't have the tops seamed. I could put seams on those, but I also, since we probably won't see those polygons, we could probably just delete those in a minute. So I'll just right click, mark seam. And in this case, if I go to 3 for face mode, I can just go left click, shift left click, shift left click, shift left click, delete faces to get rid of those, right? We don't see those. They kind of stick into the bottom of the table. So I can just delete those polygons if I want to, and then we don't have to worry about a seam for those. Now that I've got the seams all selected, I can go back to kind of that material ball, right, the third one. Remember, once you have this going, go to 3 for face mode, Control A for select all, although I'm pretty sure it'll work for edges and vertices as well. I just am used to doing face selection mode. So remember, 3 for face, select all, Control A is the quick key for that, right? And then, of course, I can go into the UV editing part of, right, our UV window right here in our UV editing workspace. And there is a UV menu. You do actually have access to it by right-clicking, right? Even right-clicking here, you'll find, I think there might be some unwrap. See how there's the UV unwrap menu here as well, right? So you kind of have those options even in face mode. But there is an actual menu called UV right at the top, right there. You can kind of see where it's at. Then we go to unwrap, unwrap. And now when you look at that checkerboard, you see how it actually looks pretty checkerboard, right? It's okay if it's rotated a little bit, right? But you're looking to find it being more checkerboard, right? So if I undo really quick, you see how that's kind of checkerboard, but it's really stretched. That means we're getting some distortion, right? The idea of UV unwrapping is to not have overlap. If you have overlap, that's not necessarily wrong, but overlap does mean you get the same texture, right? If you have UVs that are on top of each other, they can't have unique texture, right? They're going to have the same, whatever you're painting on that area will be the same on both those legs, whatever's overlapping. And sometimes it's a great way to maximize your texture resolution. It's been a game trick for a long time. They don't need it as much now because of what we can do with video games, but particularly in the much earlier past, you would see game textures that had the same texture on both sides, and like they would do all kinds of tricks to maximize how many pixels actually ended up on the model. But we're also looking for low distortion, right? We want it to look like the texture. We want it to look like that checkerboard. So UV, unwrap, unwrap, boom. And we can see, there it is. It actually looks pretty good, right? It's pretty low distortion. And you can see it's actually taking up a lot of the pixel space as well. So that gives us that. Quickly save that, Control S. And then finally what we could do is we'll go back to 4 for object mode. I'll turn on braces, the eyeball for braces in the outliner. Select it to make sure it's the selected object. Turn off table legs. Keep in mind you can also name these, right? I don't think I named the leg one. If you go to the green triangle, you'll see there's a section called UV maps, and you can name this, right? So I could double click on that and say table legs. Go back to tabletop, and you see I didn't name that one. But there is a green triangle here, right way down here. It's kind of right above the material. If you open up the UV maps section, you could name this. You don't necessarily have to, but it's kind of good organizational. Right, that way when you look at stuff, you can go, oh, tabletop, right? And then, of course, you go back to brace, double left click, call this table braces. There we go. And, of course, I can go back to the red ball right here. It's kind of the second from the bottom. Go to the little kind of looks fully like a checkerboard, right? Black and white ball here. Pick material, and it assigns that material. And now, of course, I can go back to the white ball up here. And that'll make it easier when I go to 2 for edge mode, right? 2 for edge mode to start to set these edge loops up. Now, in this case, we don't have to actually put it right in the middle of the bevel, right? Oftentimes, you can get a pretty good unfold just by double left click, shift double left click, shift double left click, just by kind of grabbing the back and those sides, right? So this will be a bigger part without seams. Generally, if you can get less seams, that's a good idea, right? Seams are something you have to paint over. And two-dimensional painting, that's really quite a challenge. It's one of the reasons why 3D projection painting has now become pretty dominant for a lot of your texturing. You can paint right over them, and seams become far less of an issue. But it's still a good idea to have as few parts, as few islands as you can. So I'll right-click, mark seam. And then I'm just going to do the same thing on these other bars, right? Double left click, shift double left click, shift double left click, Shift double left click. You see I'm kind of taking advantage of like sides, parts of the model. Right click, mark seam. Double left click. Shift double left click. Remember that's allowing us to add, right? Shift double left click. Shift double left click. Right click, mark seam. And then I just finish this last one up. Double left click, shift double left click, shift double left click. And the nice thing is, this is what's going to be cool about the video, right? Is you'll actually be able to watch the video and go, oh, that's the seams he's putting in, right? The actual process of putting the seams in is selecting edge loops and then right click, mark seam. It's really easy, right? But what's great about the videos when you want to rewatch and you're unwrapping later on is the videos will show you right where I'm putting the seams at. So right click, mark seam. And you notice that you don't always have to put it exactly on the side. You could try to go with a bigger part, and that will often still unfold quite well. So now, of course, I can go, probably minimize this for the moment, make this a little smaller, turn that on. It's that kind of third one, the ball that's a little checkerboard like the material here. So you've got a bit of that stretching here, of course, again. Of course, I can go to 3 for face mode, Control A for select all. And then, of course, we can go UV menu, unwrap, unwrap. And you see how it actually did a quite good job of unwrapping this with very minimal distortion. So you can often actually go with bigger parts, right? In fact, just to point this out, if I put my cursor over the UV view and I hit 4 for object mode, that is island select. And you want to think of island as kind of like when you make a seam and then you unfold, it's technically unwelded, right? That stuff, those particular UVs from the other parts around it, it's kind of made it its own thing that's not linked to the rest of it, right? And 4 kind of does island select. So you can actually make bigger islands that will still unwrap pretty well, right? And then, of course, I can go back and I can turn the eyeball on for table legs, tabletop. And now when we look at this, we can see that all of the texturing looks pretty checkerboard, right? When you look at it, you're generally seeing checkerboards with very low distortion. That means you have done a pretty good job of UV unwrapping on this, right? You've got UVs that take up a lot of the space, so a lot of the pixels are being used on the texture. You're not getting any overlap so that you can have unique texturing on all these parts. And it's low distortion, so when you go to paint those textures, they're going to look pretty good on the model. All right, that will be a great place to stop for today. And like I said, we'll do some UV, start UV unwrapping on the chair tomorrow. All right, so I'll stop, and that'll be it.